When my wife passed away, that same damn day my son started talking about selling the house she built with her own hard-earned money. Man, that hit me right in the gut. After my wife died, I didn't tell my son about the $35 million inheritance. Thank God I stayed silent. I'm telling you, the way he looked at me that afternoon, standing in our kitchen like he owned the place already, calculating numbers in his head while his mother's body wasn't even cold yet, something inside me just snapped. You know that feeling when you realize you don't really know someone you thought you knew your whole life? Yeah, that's what hit me like a freight train that day. My boy, my own flesh and blood, the kid I taught to ride a bike, the one I stayed up with during thunderstorms because he was scared of the dark, was standing there talking about property values and market opportunities while my Sarah, his mother, was barely gone 6 hours. 6 hours, man. I couldn't even process my own grief yet, and he's already got his calculator out, talking about how this neighborhood's really come up in value and we can make a killing if we move fast. A killing. Those were his exact words. I just stood there by the sink, holding her favorite coffee mug, the one with the little yellow flowers she bought at that craft fair in Vermont. And I felt something die inside me that wasn't grief. It was trust. It was the image I had of who my son was. See, my Sarah wasn't just any woman. She grew up with nothing, and I mean nothing. Her daddy left when she was 4. Her mama worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on, and Sarah, she wore the same pair of shoes for 2 years straight in high school because that's all they could afford. But that woman, God rest her soul, she had this fire in her, this determination that you just don't see anymore. She put herself through nursing school, working night shifts at a diner, sleeping maybe 4 hours a day, living off ramen noodles and black coffee. When we got married, we had $73 between us. $73. We couldn't even afford rings at first.
I worked construction. She worked double shifts at the hospital. And together, bit by bit, we saved. Every single penny. She'd clip coupons like it was an Olympic sport, man. She'd drive across town to save 15 cents on milk. People thought we were crazy, but Sarah, she had a vision. She wanted a home. Not just a house, but a home. Something that was ours. Something nobody could take from us. It took us 12 years. 12 long years of sacrifices. Of saying no to vacations. Of driving cars that barely ran. Of eating at home when everyone else was going out. But we did it. We bought this house. Well, technically, Sarah bought it. See, I got injured on a job site back in '03, messed up my back real bad, and I was out of work for almost 2 years. Sarah, she never complained, not once. She picked up extra shifts, worked holidays, worked through her own exhaustion, and she saved enough for the down payment all by herself. When we signed those papers, I remember her crying, and I asked her why she was crying when this was supposed to be a happy day. And you know what she said? She said, "I'm crying because I finally have something to give our son. Something real. Something that'll always be here." Our son. The same kid who's now standing in that kitchen talking about flipping it.
Before I tell you the rest, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happened next. Now, where was I? Right. So there I am, holding that coffee mug. And my son, Trevor, he's going on and on about how the housing market's hot right now and we should strike while the iron's hot. Those were his words. And I'm just staring at him like I'm looking at a stranger. His wife, Jennifer, she's standing behind him, nodding along, and I can see it in her eyes too, that look, that hungry look people get when they smell money. They've been having problems. I knew that. Trevor's business, some tech startup thing I'd never fully understood, it went under about 8 months back. He lost a lot of money, investors' money, and from what Sarah told me before she got sick, they were drowning in debt. But man, I never thought he'd be this cold. I never thought he'd be standing here on the day his mother died, the woman who sacrificed everything for him, talking about cashing in on her death. I finally put the mug down and I looked at him. Really looked at him. And I said, "Your mother just died, son." That's all I said. And you know what he did? He had the nerve, the audacity to look at me like I was being unreasonable. He said,
"Dad, I know, and I'm devastated, but we have to be practical here. You can't maintain this place on your own. It's too big. The property taxes alone are going to kill you. We need to think smart about this." Think smart. Like his mother's death was a business problem to solve. I wanted to hit him. I ain't gonna lie. For the first time in my life, I wanted to punch my own son. But I didn't. I just walked out. Went upstairs to the bedroom, our bedroom. And I sat on the edge of the bed where Sarah had laid for those last 3 months, wasting away from that cancer that took her piece by piece, and I just broke down. I cried like I hadn't cried in 40 years. Not just because she was gone, but because I realized I'd failed her somehow. We'd raised this boy, given him everything, put him through college, helped him when he needed help, and somehow we'd raised someone who could be this callous. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, every interaction, every moment, trying to figure out where we went wrong. And that's when I remembered the papers. See, about 2 years ago, Sarah's Aunt Lorraine passed away. Lorraine was her mother's sister, never married, no kids, and she'd done real well for herself in real estate investments out in California. When she died, she left everything to Sarah. Everything. We're talking properties, stocks, investment accounts, the whole 9 yards. Sarah was shocked. We both were. The lawyers told us it was worth about $35 million. $35 million. I remember Sarah just sitting there in that lawyer's office, crying again, saying she wished Lorraine was still here more than she wanted any money. That was Sarah, man. That was who she was. We talked about it, what to do with it all. Sarah wanted to be smart about it. She'd grown up poor, and she was terrified of losing it all, of squandering what Lorraine had built. So we hired financial advisors, set up trusts, invested most of it. And we agreed on something important. We agreed we weren't going to tell Trevor. Not yet. Not because we didn't trust him, at least that's what we told ourselves at the time, but because Sarah wanted him to make it on his own first. She didn't want him to rely on money he didn't earn.
She wanted him to have that same hunger she had, that same drive. She'd say, money can ruin people, especially young people who didn't have to work for it. So we kept it quiet. We lived the same way we always had, didn't change nothing. We stayed in our house, drove our same cars, lived modestly. We did help Trevor when his business was starting, gave him $50,000 that we told him came from our savings, but we didn't tell him about the real money. Sarah made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd be careful about when and how we told him. She made me promise that 3 days before she died, when she could barely talk anymore. She grabbed my hand with what little strength she had left and whispered, "Make sure he's ready. Make sure he deserves it." Those words haunted me that night. Make sure he deserves it. And here he was, the day she died, proving he wasn't ready at all. The next morning, Trevor came back. He brought printouts, market analyses, realtor contacts. He'd been working on this all night, apparently. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had thousands of family dinners, where Sarah had helped him with his homework every night, where she had taught him to tie his shoes and read his first words, and he spread out all these papers like he was presenting a business proposal. He started talking about comparable sales in the neighborhood, about how we could list it for probably $800,000, maybe more if we staged it right. He had it all figured out. He even suggested I could move into a nice senior community, said it like it was this great idea, like I should be grateful he was planning my life out for me.
I let him talk. I just sat there drinking my coffee and I let him go through his whole pitch. When he was done, he looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to agree, to sign on the dotted line of whatever plan he had in his head. And I said no. Just that. No. His face changed, man. It got hard. He said, "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. You're grieving. Let me handle this." Let him handle this. Handle my life. Handle Sarah's house, the house she built. I stood up and I said, "This house was your mother's dream. I ain't selling it. Not now, not ever. You want to talk about something else? Fine."
But this conversation is over. Jennifer, his wife, she jumped in then. She said, and I'll never forget this, she said, "With all due respect, you're being selfish. Trevor's your only child. Think about his future. Think about your grandchildren." We don't have grandchildren. They decided years ago they didn't want kids. But suddenly now they're using hypothetical grandchildren as leverage. I looked at both of them, and I realized something. They weren't here to grieve. They weren't here to support me. They were here for money they thought was coming. And in that moment, Sarah's words echoed in my head again. Make sure he deserves it. I made a decision right then and there. I wasn't going to tell him. Not about the inheritance, not about the $35 million, not about any of it. Not until I figured out who my son really was. Not until I knew if the boy I raised was still in there somewhere, or if he'd been replaced by this person standing in front of me. Trevor tried to argue more, but I shut it down. I told him I needed time to grieve, that we talk about practical matters later, and I basically asked him to leave. He didn't like that. He left angry, and Jennifer gave me this look on the way out, this cold look that told me everything I needed to know about what she really thought of me. After they left, I sat in that empty house, Sarah's house, and I felt more alone than I ever felt in my life. But I also felt something else. I felt like I was protecting her, protecting what she'd built, protecting her memory from being turned into dollar signs. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention, really paying attention. Trevor called every few days, and every conversation somehow circled back to the house, to money, to my finances. He asked about life insurance policies. He asked about Sarah's pension. He asked about our savings. He never asked how I was doing. He never shared memories of his mother. He never cried with me or mourned with me. It was all business. And that's when I started to wonder if maybe I needed to test him somehow. Maybe I needed to see if the son I thought I raised was still in there somewhere, buried under whatever this was. Maybe I needed to give him a chance to show me he was still the good kid I remembered. So I came up with something.
A kind of plan, though I didn't know exactly what it would prove or where it would lead. I decided I was going to pretend to struggle. I was going to see if he'd step up out of love or if everything really was just about money.
I started mentioning money troubles that didn't exist, talking about how tight things were, how I was worried about making ends meet. And his response? His response was to push harder about selling the house, to talk about how that would solve all my problems, to pressure me more and more. He never once offered to help. He never said, "Dad, move in with us," or "Dad, let me cover your bills for a while." Nothing. Just more pressure to sell. And that's when I knew. That's when I really knew that Sarah had been right to make me promise to be careful. That's when I knew that somewhere along the way, we'd lost our son to something ugly, something greedy, something that made him see his own father as nothing more than an obstacle to money he thought he was owed. But here's the thing, and this is what's been eating me up inside ever since. Part of me wonders if it's my fault. Part of me wonders if maybe we should have told him about the money sooner, if hiding it made him resentful somehow, if our secrecy created this monster. Or maybe, and this scares me more, maybe this is who he always was, and I just didn't want to see it. Maybe Sarah saw it before I did. Maybe that's why she made me promise what I promised. And now I'm sitting here, months later, with $35 million that my son doesn't know about, watching him slowly cut me out of his life because I won't give him what he wants, wondering if I should just tell him the truth, or if telling him would be the biggest mistake I could make. Because what if the money makes him worse? What if it destroys what little relationship we have left? What if Sarah was right, and he's not ready? And maybe he'll never be ready. And I'm terrified that the secret I'm keeping to protect her memory might be the very thing that ends up destroying our family forever. But I made her a promise. And if there's one thing I learned from 43 years with that woman, it's that you keep your promises, especially the ones you make to the people you love when they're dying, even if keeping that promise might cost you everything you have left. 3 months went by like that. 3 long months of me living in that house alone, surrounded by Sarah's things, her clothes still in the closet because I couldn't bring myself to move them, her reading glasses still on the nightstand. And every single day Trevor would call with some new angle, some new reason why I needed to sell. And I swear each conversation took a little piece of my heart and crushed it. He started getting more aggressive about it, too, showing up unannounced with realtors, actual realtors,
Without even asking me first. Can you believe that? One Saturday morning, I'm sitting there in my bathrobe, haven't even had my coffee yet, and there's a knock on the door, and it's Trevor with this lady in a business suit carrying a clipboard. And he introduces her like everything's already decided, says, "Dad, this is Monica. She's going to do a walkthrough and give us a comp analysis." And I just stood there thinking, man, who is this person? This isn't my son. My son used to bring me coffee on Sunday mornings. My son used to call just to talk about football. My son used to ask about my day, about my health, about whether I was eating okay. Now, every word out of his mouth was about square footage and equity and market timing. I sent the realtor away, told it had been a misunderstanding, and Trevor, he got in my face for the first time in his life. He raised his voice to me, said I was being stubborn and irrational, said I was living in the past, said Mom would want me to be practical. That's what broke me, right there. He was using her, using Sarah's memory to manipulate me, and he didn't even see how wrong that was. I looked him dead in the eye, and I said, "Don't you dare tell me what your mother would want. You didn't sit with her every night when she was dying. You didn't hold her hand through the pain. You visited twice a week for an hour and spent half that time on your phone. So don't you stand here and tell me what she would want." His face went red, and he left without another word. And I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks after that, 2 weeks of silence. And you know what? Part of me was relieved. Part of me was just tired of fighting, tired of defending my right to live in my own damn house, tired of being treated like I was some kind of obstacle to overcome. But another part of me, the father part, it was breaking. Because despite everything, despite how he was acting, he was still my boy. I still remembered the good times, you know? I remembered him teaching him to throw a baseball in the backyard, remembered him running to me crying when he fell off his bike and skinned his knee, remembered how proud I was at his high school graduation, remembered dancing with Sarah at his wedding, remembered thinking that day that we'd done okay, that we'd raised a good man. So where did that man go? That's what kept me up at night, Where did my son go, and when did this stranger take his place?
Then, one night, about 4 months after Sarah passed, I'm sitting in the living room in the dark. Couldn't sleep, just sitting there with her photo album on my lap, looking at pictures of us when we were young, and my phone rings. It's almost midnight, and it's Trevor. And for a second, my heart jumps because I think maybe something's wrong, maybe he needs me, maybe he's finally reaching out as my son and not as some kind of vulture circling my assets. I answer, and he's drunk. I can tell immediately. His words are slurred, and he's crying. He's actually crying. He says, "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been awful." And I don't know what to say, because this is the first real emotion I've heard from him since Sarah died, and I'm just sitting there in the dark, holding the phone, waiting for him to continue. He tells me everything that night, the whole truth that I'd only known pieces of. His business didn't just fail, it destroyed him financially. He's not just in debt, he's drowning in it. Over $800,000 in the hole between business loans, personal guarantees, credit cards, the whole mess. Jennifer's been on him constantly, blaming him for losing their lifestyle, threatening to leave him. Her parents won't help them anymore, they're ashamed of him. He's been having panic attacks, can't sleep, feels like a complete failure. And then his mother died, and all he could think about was that the house could save him, that selling it could solve everything, could make Jennifer happy again, could give him a fresh start. He says, and I'll never forget this, he says, "I know it's wrong, Dad. I know I've been a terrible son. But I'm desperate. I don't know what else to do. I'm 42 years old and I've lost everything." I sat there listening to him sob on the other end of that phone, and my heart was torn in two directions. One part of me wanted to tell him right then and there about the money. Wanted to say, "Son, you don't have to worry. There's more money than you can imagine. Everything's going to be okay." Wanted to fix it all for him like I'd fixed his problems when he was a kid. But the other part, the part that remembered Sarah's dying wish, that part held me back. Because Sarah knew.
Somehow she knew this would happen. She knew that money given to someone who's desperate and hasn't earned it won't save them, it'll destroy them. She'd seen it happen to people her whole life, people who won the lottery or got sudden inheritances and blew through it all and ended up worse than before. And she didn't want that for Trevor. She wanted him to find his strength first, to prove he could stand on his own, to become the man she'd raised him to be before he got the financial cushion. So instead of telling him about the $35 million, I said, "Come over tomorrow, sober, we'll talk." He did come over, and he looked like hell, eyes all red and puffy, probably hadn't slept, but he was sober, and he was humble, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of my real son. We sat at the kitchen table, and I made us coffee, and we talked, really talked. I told him I understood he was struggling, and I was sorry I hadn't seen how bad it was. I told him I loved him no matter what, that his worth as a person wasn't tied to business success or money. I told him about the times I'd failed, about my own struggles, about the year when I was out of work and felt like less than a man because I couldn't provide. I shared things I'd never shared with him before, vulnerabilities I'd kept hidden because I thought fathers were supposed to be strong all the time. And then I said something that I'd been thinking about for weeks. I said, "Trevor, your mother and I, we're not rich. You know that. But I've got some money saved up. Not a lot, but enough that I could help you. I could give you $50,000 to help with your debts. But I need you to understand something. This isn't about the house. The house isn't for sale. This house is my connection to your mother, and I'm staying here until they carry me out. But if you need help, real help, I can do that, on one condition."
He looked at me with hope in his eyes, the first real hope I'd seen in a long time, and he said, "What condition?" I said, "You use it to actually fix your problems, not just patch them. You get financial counseling, you get your life in order, you figure out what you really want to do with your career, and you stop treating me like a piggy bank. You start treating me like your father again. You call me to talk about life, not money. You visit because you want to see me, not because you want something from me. Can you do that?" He cried again, but different this time, softer, more genuine, and he hogged and said yes, and we hugged for the first time since Sarah's funeral. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought maybe we'd turned a corner.
I gave him the money the next week, pulled it from one of the investment accounts that he didn't know existed, told him it was everything I had saved and that I was trusting him with it. And for about a month, things were better. He called a few times a week just to talk. He came over on Sundays and we'd watch football together like we used to. He seemed lighter somehow, more like himself. He told me he was working with a financial advisor, making a plan, looking at some job opportunities. Jennifer even came by once and apologized for how she'd acted, said she'd been stressed and took it out on me and she was sorry. I started to think maybe Sarah had been wrong. Maybe I should have helped him sooner. Maybe the money was actually helping him get back on his feet. But then, about 6 weeks after I gave him that money, something happened that changed everything again. I was at the grocery store, just doing my weekly shopping, and I ran into Barbara Chin. She's a neighbor, lives 3 houses down, and she's chatting with me in the produce section, asking how I'm doing, telling me about her garden, normal stuff. And then she says, real casual like, "Oh, I saw Trevor and Jennifer at that new steakhouse downtown last weekend, the fancy one that just opened. They were celebrating something. Looked like they were having a great time." And my blood just went cold. That steakhouse. I knew about it because there had been articles in the paper when it opened, talking about how it's like $200 per person. Real high-end stuff. And Trevor's there celebrating? With money I gave him to get out of debt? I didn't say anything to Barbara, just smiled and nodded and finished my shopping. But inside, I was boiling. I drove home and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, just staring at nothing, trying to process it. Maybe Barbara was wrong. Maybe it wasn't them. Maybe they were there for a business meeting or something legitimate. But I couldn't shake this feeling in my gut, this feeling that I'd been played. So I did something I'm not proud of. I looked at Trevor's social media. I never paid much attention to that stuff before, but Sarah used to look at it sometimes to see what he was up to, so I remembered how to find it. And there it was, posted 5 days earlier. Pictures from that restaurant. Him and Jennifer all dressed up, fancy steaks and wine bottles on the table, and the caption said, "Finally able to breathe again. Here's to new beginnings." New beginnings.
With my money. Money I told him was everything I had saved. Money he'd promised to use to fix his problems. And he's blowing it on fancy dinners and posting about it online. I felt sick. Actually sick to my stomach. I had to run to the bathroom and I thought I was going to throw up. And that's when it hit me. Really hit me. That Sarah had been absolutely right. She'd been right about everything. She'd seen something in Trevor that I didn't want to see. Or maybe she'd just been more realistic about human nature, about what happens when people are desperate and money comes easy. I thought I was being kind, being a good father, helping my son in his time of need. But what I'd actually done was enable him. I rewarded his bad behavior. I taught him that if he pushed hard enough, if he cried and apologized, he could get what he wanted from me without actually changing anything. And the worst part, the part that really killed me, was that I'd done it with money that was supposed to be his eventually anyway. That $35 million, Sarah had always intended for it to go to him someday. We talked about it. After we were both gone, he'd get everything. But she wanted to make sure he was ready, that he'd matured, that he wouldn't waste it. and I'd just proven her point. I'd given him a tiny fraction of what was waiting for him, and he'd already blown it on luxury dinners and God knows what else. I didn't confront him right away. I waited. I watched, and over the next few weeks I noticed things. New clothes on Jennifer when they came to visit. Trevor mentioned they'd taken a weekend trip to Vegas. Said it was for a friend's bachelor party, but there was something in the way he said it that felt off. He talked about looking at new cars. And the worst part? He barely called anymore unless he needed something. The pattern was back. The Sunday visits tapered off. The genuine conversations disappeared. It was all surface level again, all performance. And I realized he'd played me. That whole breakdown on the phone, that heartfelt apology, that promise to change, it had all been an act to get what he wanted from me. Or maybe it wasn't an act at the time, maybe he'd meant it in the moment. But the second he got the money, the old patterns came back. Either way, I'd lost my son again. And this time, it was partly my fault for thinking money could fix what was broken in him.
Then, about 2 weeks ago, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew. I got a call from a lawyer. Not my lawyer, a different one. A guy named Richard Pemberton. Said he was calling on behalf of Jennifer's father, Robert Hastings. I knew Robert a little bit, met him at the wedding. Seemed like an okay guy. Some kind of businessman, pretty wealthy. Pemberton says he needs to meet with me. It's urgent. It concerns my son. My first thought is maybe Trevor's in trouble. Maybe he did something illegal with his business debts. I don't know. My mind was racing. So I agree to meet him at his office downtown the next day. I drive down there, this fancy office building, all glass and marble, and Pemberton's office is on the 20th floor with this view of the whole city. He's a serious-looking guy, probably 60, expensive suit, and he sits me down and says, "Mr. Harrison, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you deserve to know the truth about what's happening in your family." And I'm sitting there thinking, what truth? What's he talking about? He slides a folder across the desk to me and says, "This is a financial investigation we conducted on your son and daughter-in-law at Mr. Hastings' request. He's been concerned about his daughter's marriage for some time." I open the folder, and it's full of bank statements, credit card records, all kinds of financial documents. And Pemberton starts walking me through it, explaining what I'm looking at. Turns out Trevor's debt situation is way worse than he told me. Not $800,000, more like $1.2 million. And that $50,000 I gave him, according to these records, less than $10,000 went to actual debt payments. The rest, gone in 6 weeks. Restaurants, shopping, a sports memorabilia purchase for $18,000. $18,000 on what looks like a signed basketball jersey, deposits to online gambling sites, cash withdrawals, just blown through like it was nothing. But that's not even the worst part. Pemberton says, "Mr. Harrison believes your son has been systematically manipulating you to gain access to your assets, specifically your home. He asked me to investigate because he's concerned that once Trevor exhausts all other options, he may try more extreme measures." I asked what he meant by extreme measures, and Pemberton gets real quiet and says,
"Mr. Harrison, has your son ever discussed getting power of attorney over your affairs? Has he ever suggested you might be getting forgetful or unable to manage your own finances?" And my stomach just dropped. Because, yeah, Trevor had mentioned something like that about a month ago. Real casual. Said something about how, at my age, it might be good to have legal safeguards in place, how he'd feel better knowing he could help me if I ever needed it. I'd brushed it off at the time, thought he was just being concerned, but now, sitting in this lawyer's office looking at evidence of my son's financial deception, it took on a whole different meaning. Pemberton leans forward and says, "I'm telling you this because Robert Hastings, despite his complicated relationship with his daughter's choices, doesn't want to see an elderly man taken advantage of. He's seen this pattern before in his business dealings. People get desperate, they start justifying increasingly unethical behavior. Your son is in a very dangerous financial position, and based on his recent actions, we have reason to believe he may be planning something." I asked what I should do, and Pemberton said, "Protect yourself. Get your own lawyer. Make sure your estate planning is airtight, and for God's sakes, don't give him access to any of your accounts or legal authority over your decisions." I left that office feeling like I'd been punched in the gut all over again. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This wasn't just about a son who'd gotten a little too focused on inheritance. This was about someone who might actually be planning to manipulate his own father, possibly even declare him incompetent or something to get control of his assets. My own son. The boy I'd raised, who I'd loved unconditionally, who I'd given everything to. And I sat in my car in that parking garage for over an hour, just sat there. And I couldn't stop shaking because I realized that Sarah had saved me. Her insistence on keeping the inheritance secret, her making me promise to be careful, her final words about making sure he deserves it. She'd somehow known, maybe not the specifics, but she'd known that money can reveal who people really are.
And she'd protected me from finding out the hardest way possible what our son had become. And now, I'm sitting here tonight, the folder from Pemberton's office on my kitchen table, looking at evidence that my only child, the person I'd created and raised and loved more than anything except Sarah, might be planning to betray me in ways I can't even fully comprehend. And I don't know what to do, because how do you fight against your own son? How do you protect yourself from someone you'd die for? And the weight of this secret, this $35 million secret, it feels heavier now than ever. Because I'm realizing that Sarah's gift, Lorraine's legacy, this money that was supposed to secure our family's future, it might be the very thing that destroys whatever's left of my relationship with my son. And I made a decision tonight. I decided I have to tell him the truth. I have to sit him down and tell him everything about the inheritance, about the investigation, about all of it. Because maybe, just maybe, if he knows that I know everything, if he knows that I've been watching and testing him, if he knows how badly he's failed those tests, but also knows that despite all of it, there's still this fortune waiting for him if he can just prove himself worthy of his mother's memory, maybe that will snap him out of whatever darkness he's fallen into. Or maybe it won't. Maybe it'll make everything worse. Maybe he'll never forgive me for keeping it secret, for testing him, for giving him rope to hang himself with. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep lying. I can't keep watching my son self-destruct without giving him one last chance to save himself. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to call him and tell him we need to talk, really talk. And I'm going to lay everything out on that kitchen table where Sarah used to make breakfast every morning for 40 years. And I'm going to find out once and for all if my son is still in there somewhere, or if I've already lost him forever. But tonight, right now, sitting here in this dark house with Sarah's picture on the wall looking down at me, I just got a text message from Trevor that made my blood run cold. It just says, "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important tomorrow. Coming by at 9 a.m. Don't make any plans." And something about the way it's worded, something about the timing right after my meeting with Pemberton, something in my gut is telling me that whatever he's planning, Whatever move he's about to make, it's happening tomorrow. And I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can handle finding out what my son has become. But ready or not, tomorrow, everything changes. And I'm scared.
I'm actually scared of what's about to happen in my own home with my own child, and I'm wondering if this is how Sarah felt at the end. Lying in that bed, knowing she was leaving me alone to deal with this, knowing she couldn't protect me anymore. Wondering if the secrets we kept were the right choice, or if we should have done everything differently. And I'm looking at our picture, and I'm whispering, Sarah, I hope you were right. I hope this was all part of some plan you saw that I couldn't see. Because tomorrow I'm going to need you more than I've ever needed you. And you're not here. And I've never felt more alone in my entire life. And that text message is still glowing on my phone screen. 9 a.m. And I have no idea what's about to walk through my door in the morning, but I have a feeling that nothing will ever be the same after tomorrow. And the secret that I've kept for all these months is about to either save my son or destroy him. And I don't know which one it's going to be, but either way, I can't run from this anymore. I can't hide behind Sarah's wishes or my own fear. Tomorrow, I have to face the truth about who Trevor has become and what I'm going to do about it. And God help us both, because I don't think either of us is ready for what's coming. He sat down at the table and didn't seem to notice all the papers at first, or maybe he was too focused on whatever he'd come here to say. And he opened his briefcase and pulled out his own stack of documents. And I sat down across from him in Sarah's chair, the chair she'd sat in for thousands of meals. And I waited. He cleared his throat and said, Dad, I've been doing a lot of thinking since Mom died. About the future. About your future specifically. And I've talked to some people, professionals, and they've helped me realize something important. You're 71 years old, you're living alone in this big house, and I worry about you. I worry about your safety, your health, your ability to manage everything on your own. And there it was, exactly what Pemberton had warned me about, the setup, the compassionate-sounding concern that was really about control. And I felt this cold rage building in my chest, but I kept quiet, let him keep talking. He slid some papers across the table and said, I've had an attorney draw up some documents. Nothing scary, just a power of attorney agreement that would allow me to help you manage your finances and make medical decisions if you ever needed help. And I've also prepared a very generous offer to purchase the house, well above market value, which would give you more than enough to live comfortably in a nice assisted living facility where you'd have people around, activities, medical care on site. I really think it's the best move for everyone. Everyone. Not for me. For everyone. Meaning for him. I looked down at these papers he'd slid across to me, and I saw my whole future written out by someone else. My independence gone, my home gone, Sarah's legacy erased, all wrapped up in legal language that made it sound like love, but was really about taking everything I had left. And something inside me just snapped. I pushed his papers aside, and I pulled my stack of documents forward. And I said, Trevor, before you say another word, before you ask me to sign anything, there's something you need to know. Something your mother and I kept from you. Something that's been eating me alive for months, but I kept quiet because she made me promise to wait until you were ready. He looked confused for a second, like he couldn't decide whether to be defensive or curious, and I could see the kid in him flash for just a heartbeat before that cold, practiced expression came back. I took a slow breath and said, Your mom left behind more than memories, son. She left something real, something she wanted you to earn, not inherit out of greed. He frowned,
leaned forward and said, "What are you talking about?" I slid the trust papers across the table toward him and said, $35 million, Trevor. That's what your mom left us. Not me, not you, us. It came from her family's land deals and investments, and when she passed, the whole thing came to me as executor. She wanted it held in trust until I decided you were ready to handle it like a man, not a businessman. He blinked fast, the color draining from his face, his jaw working like he couldn't process what I'd just said. 35 million? He repeated, voice cracking just a bit. And I nodded. Yeah, 35 million. And you were about to have me sign over my damn life for a few $100,000 and a power of attorney form. He tried to laugh, this awkward, nervous laugh that didn't sound like him at all. Dad, come on, this has to be some kind of joke. I leaned back in the chair, watching him squirm. You think I'd joke about something like that? Sarah made me promise to keep quiet until I saw who you really were after she was gone. And I gotta say, son, this morning's been one hell of a revelation. He looked down, his hand shaking just a little, and I could almost see the battle going on behind his eyes, the love of money fighting with the guilt of what he'd just tried to pull on his own father. Why didn't you tell me sooner?
He asked, finally. And I said, because you weren't ready. You're still not. You've been chasing shortcuts your whole damn life, always looking for the easy way instead of building something real. That's not what your mother wanted for you. He ran his hands through his hair, eyes darting toward the window like he wanted to bolt. Dad, you don't understand. I've got debts. I've got people waiting. Yeah, I figured. That's what this was about, huh? Not about my health, not about safety, not about love, about debts. He slammed his hand on the table, voice rising. It's not that simple. I stood up slow, calm as a preacher. It's always that simple, son. Money shows who you are, and right now I'm seeing someone I barely recognize. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. Outside, a car engine rumbled down the street, and for a second I thought about all the mornings Sarah had sat right there, sunlight in her hair, talking about how proud she was of the man Trevor would become. I swallowed hard and said, you know, your mom used to say life's tests come when you least expect them. I guess this is yours. He shook his head, his voice breaking. Dad, please, I can fix this. Just give me a chance. I sat back down, looked him square in the eye. You already had your chance. You came here today ready to take everything from me. If that lawyer hadn't warned me, I might have signed those damn papers out of love and trust. You'd have owned this house, my accounts, everything. Tell me, what would you have done next? Sold it? Cashed out? He didn't answer. Didn't have to. His silence said it all. After a long minute, I gathered up the papers, stacked them neatly, and said, the trust stays locked. You won't see a cent until you prove you can handle life without scheming. His face twisted with frustration and guilt.
So what? You're just gonna sit on 35 million while I drown? No, son, I said quietly. I'm gonna watch and see if you swim. He stood up so fast his chair scraped loud across the floor. You're making a mistake, he hissed. You think Mom would have wanted this? I looked up at him, tears burning behind my eyes. Yeah. I think she'd have wanted you to learn what real value means. It ain't dollars, Trevor. It's character. He grabbed his briefcase, stormed toward the door, then hesitated on the porch. You'll regret this, he said, his voice shaking. Maybe, I said. but not as much as I'd regret raising a man who can't tell love from money. The door slammed, and for a long time all I heard was the ticking of the old kitchen clock and my heartbeat slowing down. I sat there staring at the spot where he'd been, the papers still spread across the table like ghosts of choices I almost made. A few minutes later, I picked up my phone and called Pemberton. "You were right," I said. "He came for it." The lawyer sighed. "I'm sorry, John. Do you want me to make any adjustments to the trust?" I looked out the window at Sarah's garden still blooming even after all the storms, and I said, "Yeah, make one change. If he ever comes back, not for money, but for forgiveness, I'll be ready to listen." I hung up, poured myself another cup of coffee, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange peace. Maybe silence had saved me. Maybe it had saved him, too. I took a deep breath, looked out at the sunrise, and whispered, "Sarah, I did what you'd have done." Then I turned to the camera and said, "Life's got a funny way of testing your heart before it hands you blessings. Remember that silence ain't weakness. It's wisdom. If this story hits you somewhere deep, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay on the comeback path, where every fall leads to a stronger rise."